You cool cats and kittens. Welcome to another video on Science Do Ross. Maybe I've been spending too much time on Netflix during this quarantine. But today we are going to be continue on in our notes about homeostasis. We have a couple topics left to cover. The first one that we're going to work on today is going to be about locomotion. So locomotion is the process of an organism. Sorry about that. Locomotion is the ability of an organism to move from place to place. And some organisms move. Some organisms are capable of locomotion. Others are what we call sessiles, that they basically are stationary. They stay in one place. There are also some organisms which are motile, or able to move around during some phases of their life, and in other phases of their life they are basically stuck in one place. They're sessile. So the ability to move offers several advantages for organisms. Some organisms have to move in order to obtain food, find special habitats, find mates for reproduction, to avoid predation, to avoid toxins. So there's a variety of reasons why organisms have the ability to move and how it's important for survival. So we are going to continue, as we have been, talking about how different types of organisms are adapted to locomotion. So some organisms, even single-celled organisms, are capable of moving around, and they have different structures that allow them to do that. And you saw these maybe in 7th grade. So like, for example, algae and some of the protists have a flagellum. Okay, a flagellum is a single sort of long whip-like tail that spins around and pulls the organism through the water. Others, like the paramecium, have cilia, tiny little hairs surrounding the organism. They sort of paddle it through the water. This is an amoeba. It moves through these pseudopods, these sort of extensions of its cytoplasm that it oozes forward and sort of blobs along from place to place. And this is the euglena, photosynthetic protist, that uses this flagellum for movement. As we start to move into the animals, the hydra, which we've been talking about, hydra are mostly sessile. They mostly stay attached at the base of the organ, but they can move a little bit from place to place by sort of somersaulting around. Kind of an interesting type of movement. They can grab things with their tentacles and sort of move themselves from place to place, but they generally stay in one place. Earthworms. Been talking about earthworms. Earthworms have muscles that are surrounding their body in sort of a circular pattern, and they have other muscles that go laterally along their body. And so by using these muscles, the combination, they can sort of squeeze together those circular muscles, which stretches part of their body out, and then these longitudinal muscles pull them back together. So they sort of inch forward using those muscles. And they have these tiny little like bristles, like hair-like things that you can see here that help them sort of grasp onto the surface that they are moving through. So the work of those muscles together allows them to pull themselves along through the ground. Grasshoppers and other insects, we know they have that exoskeleton made of chitin, a polysaccharide, but they also have strong muscles, okay, that are attached to the interior parts of that exoskeleton that they use to move around. And you can see in this video, this grasshopper, it's a sort of a slow motion video of how the grasshopper moves. Many insects also have wings that they use for flying from place to place. So you can see that long legs of those grasshoppers extend, propelling it off the ground. So we'll focus again mostly on humans. Humans In order for us to move, we utilize a couple different body systems. We have our muscular system, our skeletal system. We also, the voluntary movement of our body requires the nervous system as well. So the interaction of those systems allows for us to move. And so the interaction of those pieces of cartilage and ligaments, tendons, bones, muscles, all together are coordinated to allow for movement. So we'll talk first about bones. We have 206 bones that make up our body. They give our body its shape, our support. They also protect certain organs. Certain bones, like the cranium and the ribs and the sternum, are protective bones that they sort of provide a layer, a hard shell around vital organs so that they are not able to be damaged. The bones are also where our skeletal muscles connect, which allow for movement. So our skeletal muscles pull on our bones, allowing us to move around. They also store minerals such as calcium and potassium, sodium, magnesium, phosphate. They're stored within the bone material. And you can see this diagram here on the right. Bones are where 99% of the calcium in the body is stored, and various other amounts of these elements. And excess mineral can be stored in the bone, and if we have a lack of minerals in our diet, those minerals can be released from the bone and used by the body. So bone is actually a living material. We sometimes don't think about it that way. We sometimes sort of think about bone as just like a hard, non-living piece of tissue. But bones are made of living cells, okay? And they're also made of then the non-living sort of minerals that surround those living parts. So the actual living cells of the bones are called the osteocytes. Okay, the cartilage, blood vessels, nerves, connective tissue, that's all part of living cellular tissue. The non-living material, the hard part of the bones, are calcium phosphate mostly and calcium carbonate. So if we look at one of the long bones of the body, we can see the different parts of it. So there are two types of marrow that are inside of the bone. They're the red marrow and the yellow marrow. The red marrow is the part that produces red blood cells, platelets, white blood cells. And those are mostly found in the ends of the long, flat bones of the body. Okay, so they're sort of here at the ends of this bone. The yellow marrow is mostly fatty material. That's found in the central cavity of those long bones. There is a layer of tissue on the outside of bones called the periosteum, and this is very rich in blood vessels and nerves. It's also, this is where new bone material is produced, causing the width of the bones to grow and also to heal damage to the bones. It's also that periosteum is where tendons are attached. They attach to that tough membrane. The actual cells within the bone are called osteocytes. Okay, they're sort of found in these circular patterns around a canal, and those canals are through the bone are where blood vessels and nerves run. Okay, you can see too here. This is a X-ray of the wrist area of a person with the ulna and the radius, and you may have heard of growth plates. Okay, the growth plates are the areas where bones are growing and elongating. Okay, and so they're visible on an X-ray. And at some point, as a person is done growing, these growth plates will sort of seal up and disappear, and growth is stopped. And you can see that in an X-ray as well. So these are those osteocytes. Okay, so what you have here, and this is what they look like as viewed through a microscope. These sort of circular areas. In the middle is those canals that we just mentioned. Those canals are where moving through the actual bone, you have nerves, okay, you have arteries, veins, and lymphatic vessels. So you still have those structures in bone. They go through these canals, which are in the middle of this harder bone tissue. And these new bone material is produced by these cells, by these osteoblasts, and the bone sort of grows from those cells. Here's a list of the bones of the body. And so, I think you probably have learned a lot of the bones before, but just to review some of them, you have the cranium, okay, which protects the brain, the jaws, the mandible. You have a series of bones that make up the vertebrae, which are all stacked upon each other. You have the ribs, okay, the scapula, the collarbone, have the ulna and the radius, the humerus, the upper arm bone, the wrist bones. Okay, you have the phalanges, the fingers, lots of bones in our wrist and fingers, the pelvis, the femur, the kneecap is the patella, the two lower leg bones, tibia and the fibula. Okay, then you have the bones of the ankle, okay, the phalanges of the toes. Okay, so you have 206 of those bones. And where they attach, or where two bones meet, we call that a joint. It's a junction between two bones. And there's different types of joints that allow for different types of functioning. There are some joints which are actually called immovable or fixed joints. Okay? For example, the cranium is made up of several bones. That's my wife phone, I'll just ignore that. So there are these immovable joints, these fixed joints, which the bones sort of connect, and these boundary between those bones seal up over time. That's the cranium. Our tooth sockets are also examples of immovable joints. As far as joints where there is movement allowed between them, there's different types. There's a hinge joint. Examples of a hinge joint allow for movement just in one plane of motion. So, for example, my elbow sort of goes forward and extends, it comes back. There's not, at your elbow, there's not sort of any movement left and right at your elbow joint. Okay, here's an x-ray of what an elbow joint looks like moving. You can see that there's this circular part, okay, of the humerus, which sort of lines up, okay, with the bones of the ulna and radius, allowing for that movement only in one plane of direction. There's also ball and socket joints, which allow for movement of in a wider plane of direction. Movement, sort of your shoulder and your hip are ball and socket joints, where you have your shoulder, you can move your shoulder up and down, left and right. So you have a wider range of movement. Here's an x-ray showing movement in the shoulder joint. So you can see the ball of the humerus fits into sort of a cup shape in the scapula, which allows for that movement in a wider plane of motion. The hip is also a ball and socket joint. A pivot joint is when one bone pivots or rotates on another, allowing sort of side to side and up and down motion. Our skull, wrist, and ankle are examples of pivot joints. And then there are also these gliding joints where bones sit one on top of each other and slide on top of each other, allowing for some limited flexibility there. And our vertebrae are an example of that. The vertebrae are stacked one on top of the other, and each one can slide and rotate a little bit on the one beneath it. And so that's why we can sort of twist our back and our torso around those bones. Here's an example of a pivot joint. They're pretty complex joints. Okay, and so this is the pivot joint, which are the first two cervical vertebrae that we have, sort of in our neck, and the top bone and these ligaments that you see here. One allows for sort of this moving our head side to side. Okay, and then another one allowing our head to move up and down. Okay, and so that movement's allowed by the construction of this joint, this pivot joint. So another part of our muscular skeletal system type of connective tissue is cartilage. Cartilage is an important tissue. It's a tissue that cushions between two joints, provides flexibility at the joints as well. And so, for example, like your ears, your ears are made of cartilage. That sort of tough but somewhat flexible tissue, that is cartilage. Okay, the end of your nose, okay, not the part where there's a bone, but the end of your nose, that's made of cartilage. Okay, at the ends of our bones, for example, here in our knee, this is cartilage, and because our knee, these bones are sort of on top of each other. Okay, there are these areas of cartilage which cushion and allow the bone to sort of slide over each other, and allows impact to be absorbed by that tissue. In newborns, most of the skeleton, that's what this diagram is showing, most of the skeleton is made of cartilage. Okay, and then as the child grows, new bone tissue, okay, new bone mineral is deposited along that bone, and eventually it's hardens, it ossifies is what it's called. So that process happens gradually as the embryo grows, and even after birth, ossification of those bones takes place. You could also see we have cartilage, okay, that makes up part of our rib cage, the ends of our ribs, okay, allowing for the movement of our ribs as they flex and expand as we breathe in and out. If you ever heard of somebody having a meniscal tear, it's a tear in the cartilage within the knee. For example, I tore my meniscus a few years ago playing soccer, and when it was torn, after I tore it, my knee was really sore when I would run or play soccer, and it's because there was a tear here which irritated this tissue. Every time you would run, it would irritate this. So using arthroscopic surgery, the doctor went in and just sort of trimmed off the torn part, okay, so that it stopped irritating the knee. So now I have about only 5% of the meniscus in my knee is there. I don't have pain, but now because there's less of that meniscus found, over time, what I may find is that I have more arthritis in my knee because that cushioning is no longer there because they had to remove it. But meniscal tears are very common, especially as people get a little bit older, such as myself. So our muscles are obviously extremely important in terms of locomotion. Our muscles are what actually move our bones. Okay? And so there's different types of muscle tissue. Okay? There's smooth muscle tissue, which is involuntary. It's muscle tissue that we don't have conscious control of. Okay? And it often forms in long sheets, and it's important in our intestines, the walls of our stomach, digestive organs, blood vessels, our diaphragm. This is all muscle tissue, which is involuntary. So we don't have to think and move food along through our intestine as we swallow it and say, oh, I better move this into my small intestine and so forth. It's not the way it works, which is good. Those muscles work on their own. The muscle found in our heart, okay, is a special type of muscle called cardiac muscle tissue. It's involuntary, of course, so we don't think to beat our heart. Okay, it just happens on its own. It's controlled internally by a bundle of tissue called the pacemaker. The muscles we have control over that are voluntary, we call them the skeletal muscles. They have a little bit different structure. Okay, they're called striated. They have these sort of stripes as you look at them under the microscope. We control them with our nervous system. So we send nerve impulses from our brain down our spinal cord out through nerves which attach to the muscles. And when we tell our bicep to contract, send that message, reaches the muscles of our bicep, the muscles contract or they all shorten. Okay, skeletal muscle can shorten. As they shorten, they pull on the bones, causing us to curl our hand up. So as we learned in our Making Connections lab with the clothespin, that vigorous activity can lead to muscle fatigue because of a lack of oxygen and because of the buildup of waste products like lactic acid and carbon dioxide. Here's sort of what the different muscle tissues look like under a microscope. We have smooth muscle tissue, okay, that makes up digestive organs. Cardiac muscle tissue is found in the heart, which is also involuntary. And then we have the skeletal muscle tissue, which is the muscle tissue which we actually have control. So this muscle tissue is made of a series of these elongated muscle cells working together to form a tissue. And then we have another couple types of connective tissue, tendons and ligaments. So tendons are the muscles that attach are the connective tissue that attach our muscles to our bones. For example, a tendon you're probably familiar with, the Achilles tendon, which is in the back of your heel. Okay, so your calf muscle connects to the back of your heel by this long tendon. So when you contract your calf muscle, it shortens, it pulls on this tendon, the Achilles tendon, which pulls on the back of the heel, which points your toes downward. So if you're sitting at home, you could do that, point your toes downward, you can feel your calf muscle contract. It pulls on the Achilles tendon, okay, in the back of your heel, causing your foot to point forward. These tendons are very tough tissue. Like if you feel that tendon in the back of your heel, it almost feels like bone. That's how tough it is. It's actually not bone, it's tendon. Or if you feel the front just below your kneecap, your patellar tendon, very tough tissue. You can feel it there as well. Ligaments are, and also if you've known somebody that's ruptured a tendon or had a tear in a tendon, this could be a major problem because if you rupture or tear your Achilles tendon here, then when your calf muscle contracts and pulls on this tendon, if it's not attached to this bone, it's not actually going to move your foot at all. Okay. So ligaments are another type of connective tissue that attach our bones to other bones. So the bones of our skeleton need to be attached to each other, okay, to stay together. And these are found in the joints. They're very tough tissue, these ligaments. They're elastic. And they help to make up the various joints and allow movement. Some examples, and you probably are most familiar with ligaments because you may have heard of people tearing some of these ligaments. For example, athletes might tear the ACL. This is a ligament, the anterior cruciate ligament. Okay, it's found inside of the knee. This is the ACL. Okay, it's this ligament that's sort of in the central area of the knee joint, and it connects, okay, the bones of the femur to the bones of the tibia, and helps to stabilize the knee. And so a sudden impact to that, twisting, which puts stress on the ACL, can lead to a tear. And if a person has a tear in their ACL, then they might have surgery where they sort of replace that ACL with a piece of tissue from somewhere else in the body. If you've heard of in baseball, Tommy John surgery is when they repair a ligament found in the elbow, the ulnar collateral ligament. Sometimes, especially pitchers, have because they have a repetitive, very stressful motion, throwing like curveballs and so forth, it can lead to a tear in these ligaments that connect the bones of the elbow together. So they might repair that with tissue from other parts of their body. As far as malfunctions of the skeletal muscular system, one common malfunction is osteoporosis. This is a loss of bone density. So you see here a very dense bone tissue. Okay, when especially this is an issue that happens with women as they age. They tend to lose bone density. And so here you see a person with osteoporosis. You see much less density of that calcified bone material, meaning that this bone tissue is not as strong, more liable for a fracture. Okay, and one reason could be a lack of calcium in the diet. Okay, another is just sort of a natural process that happens with aging. And one way doctors think we can reduce the level of osteoporosis is to do more weight-bearing activities. So lifting weights and exercising can help to maintain proper bone density. Arthritis. Arthritis is the inflammation of the joints, which leads to pain because you have this inflammation, difficulty in movement, limiting of movement. So as I talked about, because I have less cartilage in my knee, over time, it's likely that I would develop arthritis because of that inflammation that might arise from those bones rubbing together. You may have heard of bursitis. The bursa are these sort of sacs around the joints which cushion them, and they have fluid in them. Sometimes they become inflamed and lead to pain, difficulty in movement. Tendinitis is the inflammation of areas around the tendons, sometimes because of overuse or because of improper movement and mechanics of movement can lead to the tendons becoming inflamed, painful. All right, so that's the end of our notes about locomotion. We have just one more section left. That's immunity, which I will be recording maybe today or maybe tomorrow morning and posting. And then we'll be done with our notes on homeostasis. So I hope you guys are having a good day. It's a little bit rainy out today, so maybe you could find something interesting to do inside. But I hope you guys are doing well. Miss you, and have a great day.